All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Central podcast. My name is Greg Healy, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. Um, Instead of having a guest speaker, which we will have again next week. Today, I've been asked some questions with regard to how to let go of difficult emotions, how to deal with difficult emotions. So I felt like it was important for us to address those things, um, so that we can have the tools in our tool belt to survive even some difficult situations, traumatic situations. And so today we're going to cover how to deal with difficult emotions. We're gonna cover how to um, let go of your past so that it doesn't have power or control over you. I'm going to give you some exercises that is going to help you as you work through. excuse me, as you work through your day to day, and hopefully will give you a sense of peace as you move forward. Um, Being on the edge of your teeth, as it were, as it relates to traumatic situations and constantly being reminded of negative things, can have a huge impact on the quality of your life. And it's important for us to embrace some type of thought process as it regards to in regards to healing and wholeness. And so let's jump right in and um, let's talk about where these things come from. Let's talk about where. Hang on one second. Where we can redirect the energy so that we are not sitting in a place where we are wallowing in our negativity all the time, right? So the one of the questions that comes um, to mind as we start this conversation is, where do the programs come from anyway? So the thoughts that come into your mind, the thoughts that you have on a daily basis are literally programs from your past, and they are reminders of things that have already taken place. So you have triggers that happen and that bring up memories from the past, because your mind is a record of the past. Say that with me. Your mind is a record of the past. It's the storehouse for all of the memories, for everything that has happened to you from the third trimester in your mother's womb to date. And so we have this scenario where, in third trimester, coming into being being born into this world and receiving information from the outside, there are two places where we can get information funneled to us. Number one is nature. So we talk about, some people talk about the difference between nature versus nurture, but here today we're going to talk about the difference, or the compilation of nature and nurture, because they both have impact on the whole of who you are as an individual and where you receive information. So your nature is your genetic history. There is enough supported science that shows us that DNA memory is a thing, and that you can take information from your DNA past and it'll be transferred from one organism to another, meaning from your grandfather to your mother to your mother to you, or however it flows through your DNA gene pool to you. But in any event, those memory modules carry information that you cannot escape. What does this mean? Does this mean that you are trapped by DNA memory? No, it means that you are imprinted by your family history and some of the traumatic experiences that happened in your family's past can be communicated through DNA memory into your being. And at the time of birth, they're there waiting on the information to be received from your nurture environment, so that you can begin to push out whatever your character and personality are going to look like. But you respond because of DNA memory um, in your system that already exists. So it's like taking mail and mailing it to somebody, and then by the time they get it, they open it, and now that information has been received. Well, that's what happens when you're conceived in your mother's womb. You are receiving information from somewhere in your DNA makeup that um, will present itself at some point in your life. You've ever heard this statement where the kid has never been around his father his entire life, but by the time he hits about 10 or 12, you hear the mama go, "Man, you act just like your father." The reason why is because DNA memory has given markers in the child that allow the child to be a certain way. It's not just in the physical makeup of the DNA that information is received. You might look like your father, but why do you act like your father? Or why do you act like your grandfather? Or why do you have a demeanor like your Uncle Joe? Whatever the case may be, it's because DNA memory is not just for your physical makeup, but also your internal makeup as well. So that's number one. That's the first place that you receive information. The second place you receive information is from your nurture. So we have nature and now we have nurture. So your nurture environment is when people around you, regardless of who they are, it could be siblings, it could be parents, it could be your grandparents, it could be your churches, your mosques, your spiritual centers, wherever you go and worship. It could be your schools, it could be in your communities, it could be anything, right? Social clubs, anywhere that you go to that is feeding information into your psyche. And experiences that you are having are recorded in your mind. And those experiences are causing you to put together a system of beliefs, a system of attitudes that cause you to interact toward your environment. And so that's where thoughts come from, right? So they all are piled up into the storehouse. And so all of these programs that have been written aforetime are now sitting in the subconscious mind, waiting for you to bump into something that's going to recall that. We call those triggers. And so sometimes when you have triggers, you don't even realize that you're doing a thing because your subconscious mind is active 95% plus of your day, according to neuroscientists have judged that your subconscious mind is actually active the great majority of your day, and you are running on autopilot. There is very few moments in your day where you come into what we call the present moment. It's something that has to be done purposefully, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. But your subconscious mind actually runs your life. People used to tell me, say, "Greg, I don't believe that. I've been training this methodology for years." And when I first started, it was a difficult um, task to try to get people to understand. So I came up with some analogies, right? But check it out. I mean, like, did you think about tying your shoe this morning? Did you think about what sock to put on what foot, or what pant leg to put into what pant, or what leg to put into the pants at, first, or what shoe to put on first? Or did you drive a car today? Did you think about going down and putting the key in the ignition, starting it, putting it in reverse, backing out of the driveway, driving up the street, going to the stop sign and making a right on your way to work, which you do every single day? You probably didn't. And the reason why is because you're on autopilot. And once your brain learns, or your subconscious mind learns a thing, then it becomes a habit, and that program plays on autopilot. And so then all you have to do is say, well, I'm going to work, and that fires the program that says, okay, it's time for me to go get my keys, put on my shoes, put on my pants, my uniform, whatever it is, walk out the door, get in the car, drive down the street. A lot of times you're on autopilot and you don't even realize that you forgot something until you get all the way to work, because your mind is on autopilot. You're not even thinking about the things that you need in order to be successful throughout your day because you haven't taken the time to stop and breathe through it. So nature and nurture is where the programs come from. So your environment is how you get fed, right? So initially, so you're from the time of third trimester in your mother's womb to about 6 or 7 years old, you're writing hundreds of thousands of programs into your psychological computer system that are going to play out for the rest of your life. And so this is a great learning period, right? And so what we should what we should embrace from that environment is that the programs, yes, while they're there, they're most of the time built for us so that we can protect ourselves or be secure in the environment. Because as a child, if your mom tells you don't reach up and grab the curling iron because it's hot, but because of your curiosity, not because you're bad, but because you're curious, you reach up and grab it anyway, and you learn that it's hot. Well, that's what she meant by that. It burned. Your mind then writes a program that says, don't touch the curling iron, regardless of whether it's hot. You look at it, and it all of a sudden sends up red flags in your mind not to do that again, right? So that's a safety mechanism. But as you get older, program needs change. And see, this is where we fall into an issue. So one of the things that I've been able to help some salespeople with, when they were younger, of course, their parents told them very vehemently, do not talk to strangers. And so then they had that literally beat into them, and it was a very traumatic experience for them not to talk to strangers, and rightly so. We shouldn't be running around talking to people we don't know, especially in today's era, because anything could happen, right? But when the child, and at 5 or 6, you don't really understand it, so that the parent wants to bring things into you that are going to help protect you through times when you're not really paying attention or you really don't know the environment. Well, what happens when you're 30 and that same program is running around in your head and you can't seem to win at any of the sales games or any of the contests that are on the floor? You can't seem to excel in your job because you just have a difficult time talking to strangers. When you get on the phone, you want to pick up the phone, but you have a love-hate relationship with it. How many sales reps do you know that really struggle with cold calling or struggle with talking to people on the phone because that they've never talked to? Well, part of the reason was we uncovered that there was a whole bunch of folks that had this system playing in the background about them not talking to strangers. And so because the program was playing in the background, they had a difficult time wrestling with the phone to get on the phone. And once they got on the phone, they were magic, right? And they were able to get it done. But they had to overcome that initial fear of whatever that was, right? And so we had to work through those fears, identify what those fears were, and set those aside so that we could overcome and move past it. Understanding that there is a difference now as an adult for the mechanism and the program to have precedence in our lives, right? So either we're going to give it power or we're not. And so we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I want to just show you how it works. So when you're as a child, you get all these programs put into your brain, but when you get older, those programs may not serve you anymore, but they still play out. And so you struggle on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't necessarily mean that you went through a traumatic breakup and now all of a sudden you're distraught. It might be that, right? And so, but what I'm saying is, it can be something that might seem trivial to somebody else, but it's causing you incredible amounts of pain in your day-to-day walk. So let's deal with that, right? So the programs that are playing in your past. So let's walk through this for just real quick. So the thoughts that come in from your nature, your nurture, we already covered that, right? So a thought comes in and it triggers a program to play. So when the thought comes in, the thought creates some chemical reaction, right? And so your body then tries to create what's called an emotion from the hormonal systems to match the thought. So you have a thought, your body wants to create an emotion. I'll give you an example. I like chocolate cake. And so, especially if it's double chocolate. So like right now, I'm drooling because I really like double chocolate cake. But check this out. So if I see a piece of double chocolate cake, it makes me happy, right? It makes me excited. I want to go get a piece of that. And, so and so I can enjoy it. So what I'm experiencing there is I had a thought about the double chocolate cake. My body created an emotion to match the thought, right? And so then I have more thoughts, which creates more emotions, which creates more thoughts. And that cycle is what we call state of being. So when you have a thought and your body creates emotion match to match the thought, and then it creates more thoughts, more emotions, more thoughts, that's called your state of being. And so in your state of being, it can be any type of scenario. You could see somebody that absolutely makes you mad. And so the more when you think about that, it causes the emotion to rise up and now you're mad, causes more thoughts to happen about the individual or whatever happened, causes more emotions to rise up, causes more thoughts, more emotions. And now your state of being is off balance, right? Now you are angry or you're frustrated or you have some intense emotion with regard to the individual. And the more you embrace that thought emotion cycle, the more it's going to engulf you. And I'm going to show you what happens next. So there is a trail that leads out from that. And so basically when you have thoughts and you have emotions, that automatically builds what we call attitudes, right? And so you have an attitude toward a certain thing, and it could be a good attitude, a bad attitude, doesn't really matter. It's not, attitude is not a negative connotation. It's just you developed an attitude toward a particular thing, right? So whatever that might be. So maybe I'm mad at somebody, right? I'm mad at Uncle Joe because he came to the family reunion and got drunk and ruined everything 10 years ago. And so I see him again 10 years later. The thought comes up and then the emotions pop up. So now I'm reliving that whole thing all over again from 10 years ago, which is crazy, by the way. So and my body, listen, my body doesn't know the difference between being in that moment 10 years ago and being in this moment right now. It doesn't know if it's happening then or if it's a memory hap. It doesn't matter to my body, doesn't care. It's going to process the information the exact same way. That's why you get just as mad today as you did 10 years ago at Uncle Joe when he came and wrecked the family reunion with his drunk self, right? And so now you still have to process through all of that stuff. And part of the reason why we struggle in our day-to-day lives is because we have not yet learned how to detach from the power of these emotions that are happening to us, right? And so we store them as programs and then they get triggered and now we have them all over again. When I first experienced this about 15 years ago, I was driving down the freeway and it was nighttime and I was going to a meeting and and it was raining, right? And it was dark and I'm coming across the freeway and I hit a slick spot and my car spun out across like 3 or 4 lanes of traffic. Fortunately, there was no one there. Nobody got hit or hurt, which was amazing. My car ended up against the median facing against traffic. And of course, my heart's racing at 1,000 miles an hour. It felt like my hands are sweaty. I'm like in panic mode. And of course, I'm in fight or flight because I feel like, I'm about to die. Excuse me. But at the end of the event, nobody got hurt, very little damage to the car. Everybody that was actually around me, they slowed down. They saw what was happening, slowed down, and everybody passed safely. I pulled around and was able to continue on my journey. I forgot about what happened over the next couple of days, even though it was a super traumatic experience. But then about 2 weeks later, I'm driving down the freeway in broad daylight. It begins to rain, and I found myself breathing real heavy. I found myself holding on to the steering wheel with a white knuckle grip, like I was so afraid to let it go. I didn't know what to do. I was panicking, and I'm looking at like 10 feet in front of the car to see if I could find a slick spot before I hit it. And I thought to myself, what are you doing? Like, you've never been like this. And so I had to pull over and take a deep breath. And I immediately had to realize that there was a program that was installed during that traumatic moment that was causing me to act like this. And if I didn't do anything about it right then and there, then it was going to cause me a lifetime of pain. Can you imagine? Every time I would get behind the wheel of a car and it was raining, what kind of anxiety I was having or what kind of panic I was about to have just because of that one traumatic experience. And I didn't learn how to process that experience correctly. But I gave it, in that moment, I gave it power because it was saving me. My fight or flight was saving me from what was experiencing as a traumatic experience. And then the next experience comes along and I'm going to repeat the process. Now, my body knows no difference. My brain and my emotional system are going to operate the same and create that state of being of panic and anxiety. And then it's going to cause me to interact with the world just like that. So once I get into my state of being, my thoughts and my emotions, right, create the attitudes. Your string of attitudes creates what's called a belief system. Now, your belief systems, they color your perceptions, which cause you to act a certain way toward the world. And the way you think, the way that you act, and the way that you feel is what we call your personality. So you think and you feel, and now you act, right? That's called your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. So you create the environment that you live in. You create the world that you live in, right? So if you are living in turmoil, if you are living in pain, if you are living in constant negativity, then I challenge you to look at the things that you're doing to cause that to come to fruition yourself. Cast your bread upon the waters, and it'll return to you not many days hence. It is a universal principle that has been known by many names, right? So the Bible calls it the law of reciprocity, or the law of sowing and reaping, right? The more common term today is the law of attraction. It's all the same thing. Basically, whatever you sow, you're going to reap it, right? There is an action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. It's the law of the universe. You can't not have it. It's not possible for you to break that law. It's not possible for you to sidestep or subvert that law. When you sow, you're going to reap. But you got to know how to neutralize the negative things so that you can create in a space that is conducive to positivity. Create in a space that is good for you to build the life that you want to build. So you are right now. Well, let me back up real quick, and I'll share this with you. And this might be a shock to you, but I had a client come to me once and said, well, they had a friend of theirs that was in a relationship where she was constantly getting beat. She was strung out on drugs, and she was living a life of pain, and wanted to know why God was doing that to her or allowing her to be in that situation. And so, I mean, the conversation could have been a pretty obvious answer, but I want to say this, that if then, and I told this person this, I said, well, she's doing that to herself. And the person says, well, that's an unfair statement, right? So you want to blame it on God, but you don't want to take responsibility for your own actions. The bottom line is, if she changes her situation, then all of the other factors will be able to change around her. She has got to create in an environment that's conducive to love, that's conducive to growth, that's conducive to, building and not being destructive. And, taking drugs is not helping your body. So she's strung out on drugs. Why is she strung out on drugs? Well, she's strung out because she's trying to compensate for some negative emotion that she hasn't learned how to process. She's lost something, right? And she needs to get a grip on what that loss is so that we can process through it and she can heal from it. Once she heals or starts the healing process, she'll feel better. She won't need to try to hide behind the drugs or hide behind the things that she's doing, the abusive relationships and the things that validate, that she feels like is validating her existence, or she feels like is expressions of love from other people when it's really not. If you just need attention, that's not the way to get it, right? But there's certain steps that we need to take in order to draw those people to a place where they can begin to heal. But it's not about judgment. It's about love, right? And so loving them to that place. Well, that's a very hard thing for people to hear when you tell them that you have to take accountability for your own actions, right? And so that's the very first thing that I'm going to say to you is, regardless to where you are right now, it's necessary for you to take responsibility for your own actions. So when you are struggling, don't look at other people. Look at yourself. Look at where the struggle might be in your own path. Find out where the path is going to take you in your struggle. Usually when you meet struggle, that's usually where the path is, so don't run away from the conflict. Let's hit it head on. And I'm going to share with you a principle that I call the rumpelstiltskin effect. And I'm going to show you in just a couple of minutes how to approach these negative emotions, how to approach the negative feelings, how to take away their power, and then I'm going to give you an exercise that you can work every single day to help make distance between you and that emotion. Okay. So how we think, how we act, and how we feel, that is our personality. Your personality creates your personal reality. You are responsible for the environment that you are creating. So I hear gurus all the time saying, oh, well, you just have limiting beliefs. Just change your limiting beliefs and everything will be okay. Well, if that was the case, then they would all be telling you how to change your limiting beliefs. But a lot of times they don't. It just sounds good to say, and it helps people sell coaching programs. But let me share this with you. There's some really good people out there that have really good information, but you got to dig for it, right? Not everything's just going to come smack you in the face, but you got to get out there and start reading and start absorbing information. But if you want to change your personality, you're going to have to, or your personal reality, you're going to have to change something about your personality. You can't think the same way and you can't feel the same way. So we have to put in what I call pattern interrupt. So somewhere in the think, act, and feel process, you've got to insert a pattern interrupt so that it can stop the process of what's going on right now. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to share with you how to identify your negative emotions, and I'm going to share with you a couple of things on how to approach them. So the first thing that we need to do is be able to identify what the negative emotion is. Now, I'm going to say this to you, and it's going to sound kind of harsh, but I'm doing this because I'm going to take away all of your excuses. You already know that the program that is playing right now is causing you pain and that it's not productive for you anymore. You already know that, right? And so that's where we want to start. I'm not talking about digging into your past and trying to figure out, something that is not obvious. I'm talking, let's start with the low-hanging fruit. Okay. So let's figure out something that is plaguing you right now, that is causing you not to be successful. It could be anything, right? Whatever that is, right? And then I want you to just take a moment. Now, I hope you're taking notes. If not, you can come back. I'll have this on the YouTube channel. You'll be able to watch it, watch the replay. But if you identify that thing, or if you can identify that thing, then I want you to write it down, right? That's the very first thing that I want you to do. Write it down. And the reason why is because we're about to identify it, right? So I developed a process called the I am process. And the first thing that we need to do is identify the negative emotion, or identify the thing that is holding us back, the difficult emotion, right? Whatever pain that is. Excuse me. Okay. Once we identify it, then the A is to acknowledge and take accountability for, right? So first I'm going to take accountability of my own actions, and then I'm going to acknowledge this thing. Now, when I acknowledge what it is, maybe it's anger. Let's just say that I'm angry, right? And so I identify anger, all right? And so then I look at that thing and I say, oh, okay, it's anger, right? So I acknowledge it. Now, what I'm not going to do is embrace it. So I want to put you in the mind of walking into a dinner party, and there's maybe a couple hundred people in the room or whatever, and all of a sudden somebody walks in the room that you really don't like. And I know that's happened to you before. So you get my point. So you're having a conversation with somebody, and you see this person and you're like, wow, all of a sudden you get the thoughts hit your head, your emotions come up, and you embrace that moment. But you don't stop what you're doing in your conversation. You just look over at the individual and you wave hi, hey, how you doing? And you just keep going, right? We acknowledge the individual, but we don't walk over and give them a big hug and have a full-on conversation with them, right? Well, that's what I want you to do with your emotions. I want you to acknowledge it. Oh, anger. Identify it for what it is, but I don't want you to embrace it. Like, oh, God, that's me all the way, 100%. I'm angry all the time. That's not how we want to approach that, right? We just want to identify it. Oh, that's anger. Then after you identify it, after you acknowledge it, then we need to make a new program. And we'll talk more about making a new program at another time. But right now, we need to deal with letting go of that old emotion or that thing that's holding you back, right? So how did I let go of my emotion of when I was driving my car? Well, how I did that was I identified when the thought triggered my mind, then the emotion came up in the panic and the anxiety and all of the heart palpitations and the sweaty palms and the panic thoughts and all the whole nine to begin to surface. I identified what that was, and I said, "Oh, anxiety," right? And then I let it go. I let it go, and it sounds simple when I say it, but it's not as simple as it sounds. That's why we call it practice. So you're going to have to put in some work. This isn't like a magic pill, like take the red pill and wake up outside the matrix. You're going to have to put in some work. And so what I do is I spend time, quiet time, whenever I have those things come up. I have trained myself now. I've been doing this now for probably close to 15, almost 20 years. And so now when emotions like that come up, then I'm able to identify them while I'm moving. But when I first started, I had to focus on that thing, right? So I spend time even in the mornings, every morning in meditation. And what I do is I spend time quiet and I just quiet my being. And when those emotions pop up, I identify it. Oh, it's anxiety. And I let it go. What I used to do was I used to take a visual and I would have be sitting on a park bench in my mind with 100 red balloons or blue balloons, whatever color you want, right? And every time I would have that negative emotion come up, I would take the emotion, I would put it in a balloon and I would let it go. And I would watch it go up into the sky until it disappeared. And eventually, and I just kept repeating that process, repeating the process until finally my brain gets it. Your brain eventually will get it. And the power of that thing will begin to dissipate. The more you let it go and you don't allow it to interact with your being, the more you're training your mind and your being to say, you have no power over me. Okay. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to let that thing go. Well, you can use balloons. I've had in my mind, I've imagined a wall of fog in front of a cabin. I'm sitting on a porch, and on a log cabin. There's some fog in front of the trees, and then I get this emotion or this thought that is not agreeable, and I push it behind the fog, right? And then I come back to my breath, to my center, right? So whatever your center is, I use my breath because I can carry it with me everywhere. I focus on breathing in, and I focus on breathing out. I breathe in and I watch the breath come into my body, fill my lungs, and then I breathe out completely and I watch the breath as it leaves my body. And so that keeps me in the present moment. And it allows me to create an environment that is not destructive, right? I'm in control at that point. Some people have identified that as mindfulness. And so there is a way in your creative space, in your 5% of your day, not your subconscious mind, but your conscious mind, to actually take control of the programs and not allow them to have dominance over you. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I want to help you understand today, excuse me, I'm coughing to death. What I want to help you understand today is that you have control over the emotions as they present themselves. You don't have to allow them to have control over you. Now, when you're in that moment, at first it's going to seem very difficult because you are used to allowing that thing to have power over you, right? You are addicted to sameness. Everybody has the capacity of being addicted to sameness. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but I need you to hear me when I say that, because you are addicted to the same thing happening over and over all the time. And That's what feels good to you because that's what's normal. You've allowed that to become normal. When you break the sameness of a thing, then you're creating a new normal, and it feels uncomfortable, and it will for a while. And I need you to feel uncomfortable because that's where your healing is going to be. Does that make sense? Okay. So now, once you identify the program and you acknowledge it and you begin to let it go, I want to share with you um, I want to share with you something. Now, I use a tool that I in my daily writing. I write in my time machine, which is my daily Healy Enterprises. We have this thing called the time machine, which is our daily productivity calendar that we use. Excuse me. And I write daily in that thing. When I have these emotions that pop up that I have difficult time with, I write them out. And here's the reason why I write them out. Right. And I'm not talking about typing it on the computer or digitizing it, which is fine. I mean, all those things are good. But there's a reason why I want you to take a pen and a paper and I want you to write it out. The reason why is because psychologically you're moving it from your head into an area where not only are you engaging one of your senses by writing, but you're also engaging other senses by seeing, hearing, touching, those kind of things, right? And so it's important for your psyche to understand the dynamic of what you're about to encounter. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so if I'm angry all the time and I'm trying to get rid of my anger, right? So first thing I do is, anger, right? So I'm not first, I want to detach from my identity of it by saying I'm angry, by just calling it anger. It is what it is, right? It has a right to be there because I created it. And now it's operating. It's a program that's operating, and I'm ready to let that thing go because it no longer serves the best me, right? But it plagues me because every time this one thing happens, I get angry. Every time she says something to me, it causes me to act a certain way. Every time a kid says something to me, it causes me to respond a certain way. Every time my boss says something to me, or my wife, or my husband, or whatever, it causes me to respond a certain way. It's a trigger, right? Oh, and they just know my buttons and they push my buttons, and then you respond a certain way. It's because the program is there, and it is created to respond in those situations, those scenarios, every single time, 100%. And unless you make the change, it's not going to change. So I need you to come into your present moment. I need you to come into your creative brain, your conscious mind, and I need you to take control of that program, right? So we're going to just call it what it is. Yep, it's anger, and we're about to let it go. So you're going to have your moment where you're just going to watch that thing go off into the sky. You're going to detach from it. You're teaching your brain at that moment that it's okay not to respond, which, by the way, I know works, and I've worked with hundreds of people who have employed this exact exercise, and it works. I promise you it works. Listen, eventually what happens is when you do this in your quiet time, you spend 5 minutes a day working through emotions and thoughts just like this in your quiet time. When you come out into the public, negative things will happen to you. And then what you'll find is that you're going to respond to the environment in a very positive way. Like negative things will hit you and you'll be like, oh, anger. And you'll just walk away. Like it won't have any impact on you. And it'll make people mad because people that want to fight and they know that they can get your goat yesterday, but today, since you've been doing these exercises, now you're no longer impacted by it. What really is happening? They don't know. They don't know. But let them go over there and be mad because it has nothing to do with you at this point because you're living a better quality of life. All right. So the thing that I want you to do is the second thing is write it down. And the reason why I say write it down and talk it out, the reason why is because if you name it, it has no power over you. And this is what I call the rumpelstiltskin effect. So if you don't remember the story, the childhood story of Rumpelstiltskin, then go back and read it. I'm not going to belabor the time with it here, but go back and read the story. It's a very short story about Rumpelstiltskin, right? So the end of the matter, the moral of the story is the queen needed to guess Rumpelstiltskin's name in order to squash the contract, which she didn't want to have happen, right? So in order to take the power of the agreement away, she had to know his name. She had to call his name, but he had never given her his name. So she had to do everything she could to try to find out what this dude's name was. And in the end of the matter, she found out what his name was, and she called him by name, and it nullified the contract. Go back and read the story. It's very powerful. The moral of the story for that is when you name a thing, then you take away its power. Because if you say, "Oh, I'm afraid," so I work with people on a consistent basis with regard to starting their businesses, right? And a lot of people, it's not that they're afraid of success or they're afraid of failure, as much as it is they're afraid of being vulnerable, right? So there's a huge one. So people that are afraid of being vulnerable will never get out there in front of other people, and they will never put themselves in a position where they're vulnerable, right? So because of that, you can't run a business if you're not putting yourself out there, because you have to fail at doing stuff sometimes in order to learn, right? And you have to put yourself out there in order to learn and grow, right? Well, vulnerability is key. So once we identified that they have a fear of vulnerability, then we were able to approach that thing, right? So then we talk about why are you afraid to be vulnerable, right? So what caused that thing to happen? When you think back in your mind, what was the first time that you could think of that you were afraid to be vulnerable, or somebody made you to think that it was not okay to be vulnerable, right? Let's deal with that thing, right? Let's address that thing, write that thing out, because once you start writing out where it came from, what it looked like, you're taking its power away. And you'll see that it's not really that big. It's not as big as your mind is making it out to be. And the reason why you have not overcome it to this point is because you have allowed the thing to snowball into this great big emotional wreck that has lied to you and tricked you into believing that you're no good, that you have no power, and that you will never overcome, right? You are the most powerful being on the face of this planet. You just don't know it yet, right? So once you take control of this position, then you no longer are giving power to the fear. You're no longer giving power to the anger. You're no longer giving power to the loss and the grief that has overwhelmed you, that's caused you to be depressed, that's caused you to think that you're no good, that's caused you to live below your standards, the standards that you should be lifting yourself above, right? Because you are worth every moment. You're worth every penny. You were created in the image of a creator that created all things that you see, and you are living below your means. There's no reason in the world why you shouldn't have the very best out of life. So, as we work through those exercises, I'm going to stop there because I want you to work on those. I want you to come back and let's dialogue about this, right? Put some comments in the videos, right? Comment below. So let's start a dialogue, in the group or whatever about some of these things, right? Let's help you overcome where you are struggling. Some of these things are obvious, but some of them are not so obvious. And here's the other thing that I recognize is if you've been struggling with something for so long, you're really afraid to attack it. And you need help sometimes. And that's okay. And that's what I'm here for. And so that's what I do for a living, right? So that's the bulk of my education. I've spent my life studying cognitive psychology, behavioral psychology, and those types of things in my degree work, in my pursuit of my doctorate, my PhD, and all of that kind of stuff is all surrounded around helping people identify these things in their minds so that they can be free. I don't care about the titles of the education and all the alphabet soup. I'm more concerned about people being free and getting the right kind of education so that I can help you get where you need to be. So if you need that help, I want you to jump in and let's throw caution to the wind. Let's start interacting so that we can be free, because that's really what we are purposed to be. And if you're not free, you're not living your purpose. You're living below your means, and you shouldn't be. So I'm going to take just a few moments. And if there's anybody here that has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments now. And I can take just a couple of questions. Or if anybody's gotten any comments that they wanted to share before we take off for today. All right. All right. Well, if there'll be none, then what I would like for you to do is, again, go ahead and push the like button, share this with as many people as you think might benefit, and drop comments. Let's start a dialogue and let's start getting people free. At the end of the day, that is all that matters, is for you to be set free. All right. Until next time, I'm Greg Healy. This is Mindset Central.